Hello, government students. This is the 3.3 virtual notes for Unit 3, Lesson 3. That's on special interest groups. All right, and looking at how special interest groups influence government. Okay? What are special interest groups? Special interest groups are defined as any non-private or non-government private organization whose members share common views and work together to try and influence and shape public policy. These special interest groups form around a particular issue, right, or a kind of theme when it comes to certain issues. So this could be around the issues like abortion, gun control, climate change, campaign finance reform, education, religious activities, rights around a particular group of people, like AARP does. Okay, but the ultimate goal of a special interest group is to make sure to try and have the government make a decision that favors their particular viewpoint. Okay, this could be through the legislature with a different law that gets passed. This could be regulations made by the executive branch, or this could be on a court case made in the court system. Okay? Now, you're going to say, well, looks like there's a lot of similarities between special interest groups and political parties. As it is, it's non-government. It's people kind of getting together to try and influence government, right? But they're going about it in different ways. Okay, political parties over here, they're all about nominating candidates. They want candidates to win office, and that's what their main issue and main goal is to get candidates to win elections. Okay, and as a result of that, they have to concentrate on a lot of different issues. They can't just pigeonhole themselves into one issue, and that's the only thing that they care about. They have to have a position on a lot of things. Okay, when it comes to special interest groups, they're going to support candidates who have their idea, right? Their idea is the focus rather than holding a particular political office, which is the main theme for political parties. Okay? So they want to influence government policies around their idea. And again, that issue or the issues that are important to their members are where they're going to spend the majority of their time, the majority of their effort, and most importantly, the majority of their money. Okay? So special interest groups are related around an idea. That is their central focus in making sure that idea moves forward. Where political parties, it's going to be more about getting people into office and winning elections. Okay, so how do you see special interest groups, SIGs? How do they influence government? One of the primary ways they do this is through lobbying. Okay? Lobbying is an attempt to try and affect the decisions made by a public official. Okay? This can be done at state levels. This can be done at federal levels. In fact, it is done at both levels. And in some instances, if you're a large enough area, it can be done at the local level as well. Okay? There's a couple of different ways they do this. They do this through direct lobbying. Okay? They do this through grassroots lobbying. They use the media and public opinion. And they also engage in electioneering. Okay? So this is how they go about doing these things. So when it comes to direct lobbying is where they're going to hire somebody, a lobbyist, to try and influence government, right, to make a particular decision. So in the legislative branch, when they're lobbying with Congress, this can look on a number of different ways. They can provide information, they can give a testimony, they can write speeches, they can draft legislation in a lot of instances to be used by a particular representative in a bill. When they're considering a law or conducting an investigation that somehow relates to their particular interests, there's going to be a lobbyist involved. Okay? So that's how the special interest groups engage in direct lobbying. In addition to that, they can also make campaign contributions to members of Congress who vote in their interests, all right, or maybe agree to vote along with their interests. This gets a little bit more into the electioneering, which we'll talk about just in a little bit. But it can be another example that kind of fits under that direct lobbying. On the right here, we have a table that looks at the amount of money spent in the 2019 or 2009 debate over the Affordable Care Act. And you can tell like $280 million in lobbying, making up almost 3/4 of all the money spent on that particular event. That's more than campaign contributions and advertising. Just a huge, huge amount of money that was spent on that one particular act of Congress. Okay? When it comes to the executive branch and the presidents, they're not going to be able to lobby with the president themselves, but they may be able to target some of his chief administrators, right? Some of the people that he relies on when it comes to enforcing the law. So they may be some senior aides to some of his cabinet members, or maybe even a White House aide themselves. Okay, but a lot of times it's actually going to be targeting officials within the various government agencies. Now, this would be related to the federal bureaucracy, all the different agencies that are a part of the federal bureaucracy, because they're the ones who are going to be writing a lot of the regulations, right? When Congress passes a law, there's a lot of room in that law, and it's up to the executive branch and these, especially this federal bureaucracy, to kind of figure out the details of how a particular law is going to be enforced. So, for example, say you have something to be enforced related to taxing, right? The Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS, is going to be doing that particular enforcement. Well, when it comes to lobbying, the lobbyist who maybe has an interest in campaign finance reform or some tax benefit might go and try and talk with the IRS official, right, who is responsible for enforcing a particular law, and get them to draft a regulation that would be beneficial to that particular special interest groups. That's how these special interest groups engage in direct lobbying. When it comes to the courts, this is a little bit newer, right? Direct lobbying for the Congress, for the president, that's been going on since the start of our country. But with the courts, it's a little bit different, because this doesn't really come about until about the 1950s with Brown v. Board of Education, in which the NAACP, which represents African Americans, the National Association of American Colored Persons, they go and lobby successfully in Brown v. Board of Education that segregation was a violation of their constitutional rights. And as a result of that, special interest groups started to take a bigger interest in getting involved in lobbying in the court system, all right, when it comes to that. And then what you start to get is a filing of amicus briefs, all right? These are essentially it's Latin for friend of the court, and they're documents that get filed in a court case that contain arguments for their particular side of a dispute, right? So one of the big ones that happens a lot is when you start to even get in a particular case that has to deal with civil rights. The American Civil Liberties Union is going to be probably filing an amicus brief that deals with the protection of those individual rights, because that's what the ACLU is concerned about. That's their big issue, is civil liberties. So that can be one way, is filing amicus briefs. The other is making their issue a feature when it comes to the nomination process, right? Remember, judges are nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. When it comes to that confirmation thing, these special interest groups want their issue to be at the heart of it. So the pro-life, pro-choice movement has been one of those issues that's been kind of thrust to the very forefront when it comes to judicial nominations, right? Republicans want a pro-lifer in there, where Democrats tend to want somebody who's more pro-choice. So that becomes a key issue in that nomination process. When it comes to grassroots lobbying, this is more the traditional lobbying that individuals might get into, but a lot of special interest groups get involved in it as well. And that's where you're trying to kind of put pressure from the ground up, which is why they call it grassroots. It starts with the general public at its most basic level, dealing with voters. Okay? So this means the voters are going to be contacting their representatives, and they try to do this in mass, right? And there's no other special interest group other than AARP that does this better, okay? Because they engage in grassroots lobbying on just a massive, massive level. How effective is this method? There's kind of mixed results. It really all kind of depends on who your congressperson is, okay? And if they're going to be swayed by that type of lobbying or not. Because it is effective for some, but for other people, not so much. But like when it comes to AARP, they send more letters to Congress. They give more phone calls than any other group. And AARP is the Association of American Retired Persons. So the media and public opinion. Special interest groups are often going to be trying to use the media and use the power of public opinion to try and influence other groups as well. So they will often release advertisements. They will have press releases and statements that will be made. They might give interviews on a news station or something like that about their particular issue. They may release a study or other materials that are trying to sway the public in their favor, right? They're trying to get to the public on their side. And a lot of times it's about bringing their issue to light. The bigger your special interest group is, the more people you have behind you, and the more people supporting you, the more people donating, key idea there, donating to your particular idea, the more direct lobbying you can do, the more leverage you have when it comes to getting those laws passed and getting those regulations passed, right? So that becomes a major part here. So you do that. If you don't know who the guy on the right is over here, Mr. Lafayette, we will discuss him a little bit more in class, right? As he has a key statement that kind of relates to this that I'm sure you're familiar with. Last thing we're going to talk about is electioneering. Okay, electioneering. This is about trying to elect government officials who are going to back their particular idea, right? It's trying to help public officials win those government positions and support their ideas. This can happen in the U.S. Congress. This happens in state legislatures. This happens with governors. This happens with a lot of other state positions and even some local policymakers in some instances, right? The more people a special interest group is able to get into government positions, the more likely laws and regulations will pass in favor of them. Okay? So that's the big thing when it comes to electioneering. So how do they go about doing this? Well, it starts with political action committees, right, or PACs, as we like to refer to them in short. A PAC is a political committee that's organized for the purpose of raising funds and spending that money to try and elect or defeat candidates. It's all about elections. Okay? And most PACs are going to be representing a particular idea. It could be business, a certain business group, like fossil fuels, or the oil industry. It could represent a labor group like a teachers union or the American Auto Workers Union, or it can represent an ideology like the NRA, right, the National Rifle Association and gun rights. But there's limits based on federal law what PACs can do with that money. They can give up to $5,000 to a particular candidate, right, to their committee per election. All right, so when it comes to elections, there's usually multiple elections. You have a primary election, you have a general election that happens during election season, so you could give up to $10,000 during that. Or in some instances, you might get a special election where you might have a primary and then a special election. That's where somebody is in Congress has like retired or died and they have to fill that particular seat. So you're limited on how much money you can spend. And in political money, $5,000 is not a lot. So for a long time, special interest groups were limited when it came to electioneering. All of that changed, though, when we get to Citizens United, right? Citizens United versus FEC. This was a 2010 Supreme Court case that really changed how elections are funded. Because what it does is it allows all these special interest groups to spend as much money as they would like to. All right? They can spend unlimited money in electioneering as long as it's done independently. They just can't coordinate with a particular campaign. So it's one of those ways where these special interest groups were able to do a lot more and use their money to influence policies a lot more. And this has led to the rise of what we call super PACs. Okay? Well, what is a super PAC? It's essentially a PAC, right? A political action committee. But rather than working with campaigns, super PACs are making independent federal expenditures, right? They're making their own decisions. They're not going into federal election. They're not helping support candidates directly. They're making independent things. So this could be making independent advertisements, independent mailing things. There's just a ton of different things that they could do. Yeah. But again, they can't coordinate with any election. So this can be done in favor of a particular person, or it can be done in a negative ad campaign to get rid of, all right, or prevent someone from being elected. But the big thing here to remember with super PACs is there are no limits and there's no restrictions on the source of these funds, all right, as they're just beginning to spend money. So super PACs have led to what we call dark money, where you just don't know where some of these things are coming from. It makes it a lot harder for your average person to be able to understand who certain politicians are loyal to, right? It used to be able to look and say, all right, who's funding his campaign? But there's other people who are making now these independent expenses, and it's really changed the game here in the past 10 years. And we'll see just how much that is in class. So That is everything for today. So we'll see you in class as we continue to talk about special interest group.